we as humans are all about communication because we are social beings. Therefore, there is no one more dangerous than the person who is able to clearly and concisely articulate their point, especially to the point of convincing or selling their ideas to another person. Shalom, everyone. My name is Nakaraya. Today we have quite a bit to cover, as this video is going to be about, or at least it's going to be my attempt at teaching you all, whoever is listening, how to articulate themselves in the best way possible. First, we need to understand a few things. So, the utilization of words to its perfection is the closest we can legally get to magic. This is a quote of mine, and the reason I say legally is, obviously, as you guys know, I follow the Bible, and as Israelites, we know that witchcraft is very strictly forbidden as far as the law is concerned. Now, when we think about words, truly, it's almost supernatural, the ability to persuade, to convince, to tell a story, to make someone understand your perspective from even, especially someone who previously did not want to encounter your perspective on said topics due to disagreeableness. It quite frankly is the most beautiful thing that you can do. And that's why people are so fond of authors and writers in general. The ability to make someone feel anything with your words is truly remarkable. And it's a necessary skill if you want to have any sort of importance to your name. Also, you have to understand that every person on the earth is extraordinarily interesting. And if you're not privy to this fact, then one of two things is happening, or perhaps both. You're either not listening enough to that person, or they're not good at articulating themselves, which is very tragic. The next point is, lack of elucidation causes for an extreme catastrophic failure of self-representation. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you look at someone who you don't know, right, and they look relatively uninteresting, you don't necessarily know that they're uninteresting until you talk to them, right? Because once they've spoken about themselves, their past experiences, and why they are the way that they are, now you know a little bit more about them. Now you can actually calculate exactly how interesting they are based off of the things that they say, the words that they choose to use, and the experiences that they had, and how they express that to you with articulation. But if they're very bad at doing so, they might be the most interesting person in the world, but they're not interesting to you because they're not representing themselves well enough, which is extremely tragic, I believe. And this is why I typically like to put such an emphasis on education, not necessarily just restricted to academics. I'm just saying education as a whole. So, with that being said, I have a couple of tips that I'm going to be going over, and hopefully, truly, I really hope that this does help people, because if it does, you'll be all the more better for it. So tip number one, I have vocabulary. Vocabulary is very important. Brian Tracy, I believe it was, actually did say once that one of the easiest ways to impress individuals who are unfamiliar with you is to have a broad bank of vocabulary. So do that, and I'll have other tips on how to do that. But make sure that you're using words, or rather, the typical words that you use from day to day. Try to do research on substitute words that you can use instead of those. Right? So, for example, let's see. So there's this quote. It's actually pretty funny, or not quote. It's a term of phrase, and I don't quite fancy this this phrase, to be quite honest with you. And for a while, I've been trying to think of what other things to say to replace the meaning of it. So the phrase is at the end of the day. People tend to say this to summarize a simplistic conclusion of whatever they've previously just said. So at the end of the day, we're all family, for example. So I would say now, instead of that, I'd say in the final analysis, we are still family. And it's far more preferable to use language like that because it's unique. Not many people use it, which makes you different. And if you're different and you're unique, that means people are immediately going to want to listen to you even more. Not necessarily because they like you, but just because you're more interesting. You're different. And if you're different, that means that they can't analyze you as the typical person. So they have to pay more attention to you and the things that you say. Right? So, vocabulary expansion. Read. Obviously, reading is very, 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 very good practice if you want to expand your vocabulary and get fluency in speech as well. So I read this study that, there's this thing called subvocalization, which is the action of internally pronouncing individual words as you read in your head. It's a sort of dialogue that you hear in your mind while you're reading. Everyone does it. And what scientists came to learn is because of that, and because we've all been doing it from such a young age, it's very typical for humans to read at the same pace that they speak. So, in other words, the faster that you read and the more ability that you have to comprehend what you read, the more fluidity that you will have with your tongue in discourse and conversation. So read. Read, read, read. And if you don't feel like reading, hence the next tip is listen to people you know are smarter than you. And this is really important. I worded it this way, very specifically I articulated this way to elucidate a certain point. You want to listen to people that you know are smarter than you. This is, of course, an error of pride for people, but we work with reality here as far as Nakarai's counsel is concerned. Someone may indeed be smarter than you, but because you don't really know that, nor do you care about it, you may not listen to that person. It's the harsh reality of life. But if you know that someone is smarter than you, then you're more likely to actually listen to what they have to say, take heed to their advice, etc. Listen to people who you know are smarter than you or wiser than you. Listen to their teachings. Listen to godly discourse, for example. Philosophical conversation is another good one. Because in that you'll be definitely exposed to much more expansion and broad library of vocabulary. Let's see. So, smarter than you. Mastery of tonality. This one is really, really important. So, I forget the percentage. It's a shame, as my father and I actually we analyzed the statistics and percentage for this yesterday. But 7% of communication is what you actually say, right? And we're going to talk about that very briefly right now, but more clarity later on in the video. You need to understand, though, because typically what people will say is, okay, well, a lot of what you say isn't necessarily the matter in these, sorts of, good, let's say, quality dialogue, right? It's more about your body language and this and that and, etc., your tone of voice, which we'll talk about shortly. But that is also to say, though, if you are really, really good at articulating yourself and the words that you say in such a concise and educated manner, if you can master that 7% truly, imagine what you can do. Because people are already infatuated by 7% of the communication that you display. So if you master that 7% and then you have, some level of adequacy of skill set in the other formats of communication, then you're going to do very, very well. Very, very well indeed. Now, master of tonality, what does that mean? Well, you want to fluctuate, and I used to struggle with this. I'm still working on it, in fact, but I used to struggle with this specifically when I was a teenager. In adolescence, I was definitely a monotone individual. Monotone being talking in a straight line like this no matter what you say, you're always going to say it with this sort of mundane, almost melancholic linguistic fashion. And it's extremely distasteful, especially if you're talking about something that's positive. Because if you're talking about something positive, but you have a monotone, especially a deeper monotone tonality, then it's going to be perceived that you're pessimistic in nature, which perhaps you are, and perhaps you have to work on it. But a good step to work on that pessimistic nature is to have flexibility in the frequencies of tonalities that you choose, right? So, mastery of tonality, what does that look like? Even as I'm talking right here, right now, you can hear that I'm basically putting seasoning on each individual word that I use. I'm not talking in a straight line as far as frequency is concerned. I'm going up and I'm going down and I'm going side to side, and I'm using very elastic language. This keeps the audience, if you're a speaker, or if you're just simply conversing with another person, it keeps their brains intrigued. There was a scientific study that consisted of what happens to the human brain when they listen to monotone frequencies. It's something of the degree, and I'm not familiar with the scientific literature, but it's something to the degree that your brain literally turns off due to boredom, and we'll stick with boredom. Because if it's so dry and it's so simplistic, your brain no longer has to calculate it. It's now being absorbed. Yes, absorbed indeed, but it's being absorbed by the subconscious, the lizard brain, the part of you that's not necessarily attentive. Only when you've mastered tonality in your pitch, especially if you match it to the severity of the words that you speak, will you have the undivided attention of your audience. A good way to test this out, and it's a really good feeling, I implore you, it's really, really good feeling. The next time you are at a dinner table or in a crowd or in a room, when you speak, look into the eyes of everyone and see who is paying attention to the words that you say. Because this is a good indicator of a couple of things, actually. One, to some degree, they value what you're saying. To some degree, they're interested in what you're saying. And they're interested so much that they've stopped their casual interrupting and let's say just speaking in general and making noise and all of this just so they can hear and truly absorb what you have to say, because there's a certain amount of importance and scarcity that's put upon your voice and what you're saying. Because quite frankly, in this generation, not many people know how to speak that well. In fact, the most feared thing, second being death, what's feared more so than death in our society is public speaking. And so you would reckon, with that being a fear of people's, they shy away from it. Master this. Master your fear. Master yourself. Okay. That's your words. Ooh, I've lost my spot. Yes. Oh, it's just a little note here. Yes, the mastery of tonality is the equivalent to painting words with a fine brush. And indeed, I do believe that. Of course, I wrote it. Okay, this one is really, really important. Habitually reiterate other people's statements in your own words. And I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, now, why is this important? It's important because, as we said earlier, a big part of communication is indeed listening. Now, in my studies of both psychology and the scriptures, I come to this conclusion that every single person on the planet has one thing in common, at least. And what that is every person on the planet has the desire to be understood by someone, at least one person. Everyone has the desire to be understood. And how do you do that? How do you effectively understand someone? And how do you come across as though you've understood what they've said to you? Well, this is what you do. You listen to what they say. And you get into the habit of, once they're done speaking, you reiterate what they've said in your own words. That way they understand, yes, that is what I've said. So let me do a dialogue here to give an example of this. Let's see. What's a story? Oh, I don't know. Let's see. Oh, my girlfriend, she really hurt my feelings today because she said some really mean things about my hair. And I get really insecure about my hair because I have, bald spots and, receding hairlines, that runs in my family, yada, yada, yada. Now, what you do with that information is you mirror it right back at them and you go, oh yeah, I completely understand. So basically what you're saying is, you feel hurt and insecure about the way that your girlfriend has treated you because of, her poking at a consistent spot. Is that correct? And then they say, yes, that is that. And then if you do that with enough people, you will gain or garner the reputation of the type of person who understands or has an understanding mind or heart. And subsequently, people will come to you more for advice and what your input is, etc. Because again, it's very rare, these things. That was a very poor example, but it gets the point across. You guys all get the point. This correlates. Okay, so in my studies in clinical psychology, there's this terminology called reflection of feeling. And this is really, really valuable. And we could use the example that I just dished out, which is, that's a rather poor example. What reflection of feeling is, essentially, is based off of what someone says to you, you reiterate exactly how they feel, regardless of if they've even said that, right? And in that, you analyze and you listen to the tonality, their body language, and, of course, the words that they're actually saying to you. So, how does that look? It's like, well, yesterday, I got an F on my exam and had to go home and tell my wife the news. Now I have to retake the exam and all of this and all of that. It's just a lot, Now, you as the listener, what does that tell you? This individual, he's told you what's happened, quite objectively, but he hasn't articulated exactly what he's felt. So this is reflection of feeling. Reflection of feeling is, okay, I see, it's like you unfortunately you failed the exam, and, you have so much to do, and all of these different tasks that you have to get to, and you have to tell your wife all of this. It seems that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that you feel kind of overwhelmed with these things. Is that the case? And then you give them the freedom to answer for themselves, and likely they've said yes. And you've successfully reflected feeling. And people inherently know when they're being understood, and it gives quite the dopaminergic effect. And I'm telling you, if you habitually do this, not only will you be the person that people go to because you've shown a significant amount of wisdom in discourse, but also it will make you an effective learner. Throughout my academic career, and soon to be more expounded upon in the future, I always ask questions. Questions are super, super, super important. Questions are super, super important. Even if you don't have a question, you need to get into the habit of, okay, just so I can make sure that I've gotten everything that you've said, and then you articulate that, and they've said yes or no, and then you move on, right? Because again, we're social creatures. We are social creatures. I had this understanding when I was in homeschool. Story time for you guys to have a little more insight about my character. When I was in homeschool, I came to the very cerebral realization that I was indeed deprived socially. And I had this understanding that life is all about people, and in order to be good at life, Subsequently, you must be good at people. And in order to be good with people, you need to be a good speaker. And to be a good speaker, you must be a good listener, etc., etc., etc. And a whole bunch of social and communicative cues. So what I did was I started studying psychology and behaviorism and all of these sorts of things, so that way I can compensate for my social depravity. And in that is where I gained all of these insights, the benefits of questions and body language and tonalities and things of this nature. And this is more to be expounded upon in my video. I'm going to have another video later on where I delve into what it means to be what I call a self-skeptic. But yes, reflection of feeling. People are being understood. Okay, this is more into the action itself of speaking. You want to speak slowly to develop optimal speed as you gain competence. So, if you look at speakers in today's economy, there are a lot of slow speakers, but there are a lot of fast speakers as well. Off the top of my head, we have Tristan and Andrew Tate, for example, and we have what's his name? Jordan Belfort is another one. And these fast talkers, if that's your thing and you want to become a very fast talker, I've slowed down my speech significantly for reasons of optimal communication. But I did used to indeed be a very fast talker. But what I did was I spoke slowly and I built upon, brick by brick, the skill set of actually speaking first. You don't want to just speak fast and no one really knows what you're saying. There's an art to it. You want to speak fast, of course, but you want to enunciate every single word and pronounce it in a way that people understand exactly what you're saying. Right? You don't want to be a mutterer, and you don't want to be a mumbler. It's very unattractive. So speak slowly. And especially for men, if you're speaking slowly, what tends to happen is your voice naturally drops down in pitch. And if your voice drops down in pitch, you sound more authoritative. You sound like a leader, you sound strong, you sound masculine. So I do recommend speaking slowly. And, of course, there is a time and a place for everything. There are going to be times when you need to speak fast and times where you need to speak slow. Simply, I beg you to understand when to do this, because it can be very distasteful, to say the least on the matter, to misread a situation. Because though people aren't very good at speaking in general themselves, everyone is a critic. And if everyone is a critic, then everyone makes up your reputation. So be careful with that. Please be careful with that. Okay. Speak with concise intentionality. This is very, very, very important. You don't want to get into the habit of over-speaking. Right? You want to be concise. And with being concise, people tend to mistake this, so I want to elaborate on this a little bit more. People tend to conflate conciseness with saying too little. They're not the same. Saying too little indicates that you are not saying enough to optimally convey the proper amount of understanding that someone should gain off of what you've spoken. Conciseness is to rather gain the whole premise of a situation and speak with direct and intentional words that get straight to the point. No fluff, so to speak. Okay? Big, big difference. You don't want to be known as the person who talks a lot. You don't want to be a chatterbox, as they say, right? You eliminate that by being concise. Yes, cut flap. Posture. Okay. Posture is very, very important. So, there's so much to go into with posture. We can start off, let's pretend that we're sitting down, right? As you may know, everyone has their own preferred way to sit. Some cross their legs, as I do. Some, sit just like this. And they all, what you need to understand is they all have a certain language to them. So if I'm sitting like this, then I'm really relaxed. This may not be appropriate for a very sophisticated conversation, but this is a lot more casual, right? So that you can understand that as well. This is a lot more formal. If we're having a very intelligent discussion, then I might sit like this, is a lot more formal, right? And also what I'm doing is, no matter what, my shoulders are back, my chin is up, and my chest is out to a certain degree. And also, you need to learn, train yourself, especially as men, to speak from your diaphragm. Everyone tends to use their throat voice, and when they use their throat voice, they are essentially, they're not getting, let's just say, that they're not getting they're not getting the maximum potential of the quality of their voice. Now, I want to analyze this, what I did just there, because people tend to do this a lot. Everyone does this, by the way, but you can reduce it significantly. Everyone tends to use filler sounds like things of that nature. Do not to do this, especially if you're a salesman. Those of you who know me, you know I've had quite a bit of experience in sales, and I'm here to tell you that and will definitely lose you the close. It just will. Now, is that over-exaggerative? Perhaps, but sometimes you need to exaggerate to prove simplistic points. When you use sound effects like and you sound incompetent. You sound like you don't know what you're speaking of. You sound unsure. And especially in the realm of sales, you don't want to sound unsure, because if someone sounds unsure to me, I'm not going to trust the person enough to give them my money, because I don't want to give my money to someone who's not sure. Right? So eliminate that. Right? Because it's no good for anyone, is it? How do you do that? There are a couple of tricks to do this. So this is already a longer video. I'm going to have to speed up the process. We're almost done. Silence. You need to learn to get comfortable with your own silence. So what I did just a moment ago, since I didn't know what to say because I was formulating the sentence in my mind, I didn't say right? What I did was I stopped. I remained composed. My body language was composed and focused, and I drifted off into my own thoughts, as you can see. And this is a good example that I give to people to really illustrate the point. Because also what silence does is it puts value on what you're going to say. People tend to be very uncomfortable with silence. So once you've proven that you're comfortable with silence, people are really anxious to hear what you have to say. So you, audience, you're going to ask me, what is my favorite color? Nakaraya, what's your favorite color? It's a tough one. I have to say that I'd say green. Now all of that, right? Now ask me, Nakaraya, what's your favorite color? I'd have to say that my favorite color is green. See the difference? Now you associate silence with, oh, they're going to think I'm stupid. It's absolutely the opposite. You sound stupid, per se, when you're using ahs and ums and ums. Now, some of it is acceptable. Nakaraya, what's your favorite color? That's a good question. I'd have to say that my favorite color is green. Right? So, use that. Use silence. Use your ability to well posture yourself, because it helps a lot. Okay? Body language, I'll be very, very brief. The last tip is breathing. I feel like we've covered breathing because we've talked about the diaphragmic. Diaphragmic breathing is how you get to project your voice in such a manner where you're calm, you're collected, you're audible enough to where people understand you, and it's coming from the gut, so you have more ability to actually talk for longer periods of time. Now, the last one we're going to work on is body language, and specifically I'm going to be talking about hand motion. If you look at the great speakers of our time, and of the old as well, most of them speak with their hands. And I was articulating and elucidating to my wife yesterday as to why I speak with my hands, because she asked, didn't fancy to know why I talk with my hands. And I said the reason I speak with my hands is because you need to understand humans are social creatures, and in the fact that humans are social creatures, we learn through different means of sensory. So we have touch, we have sight, we have hearing. All right. So when you're speaking to someone, if you're having discourse or a lecture with someone, you are teaching them something audibly. So they're using their audible senses to understand what you're saying and learn from you. Now, what hands tend to do is, because most humans are visual learners indeed, and what that tends to do is you need to look at your hands as the articulate illustrators of the physical realm of what you speak of, right? And this is very, very simple. I know that was a little bit of word salad, but it's very, very simple to grasp. Oh, I tell you, man, it was the stadium. It was so large. It was so large. Now you get the picture. Versus if I said, oh yeah, the stadium, it was quite large. Like, no, the stadium was large. And then also you hear the flexibility of tonality as well. So then you have, let's say, oh yes, my sister, she got so upset over such a minuscule point of which the other gentleman said. So this gives you an indication of, or yes, it's indicative of what little thing she got, upset over. And if I say something like, oh yeah, I had a dream of this horrible beast. It was an amalgamation of so many different beasts. You see? Even if you don't know what the definition of amalgamation is, you can kind of have textual evidence to support your own personal definition of it with my hand gestures. If I'm trying to dish out what I'm trying to say, and I'm having my eyes closed and I'm doing this. Jordan Peterson is really good for doing this, by the way. He does this sort of thing, and then you can see that his hands are mirroring what's happening in his mind. His hands are showing you what's happening in his brain. He's formulating and carefully trying to grasp what words that he chooses to use for each sentence. And then after he's done, he does that, right? I tend to do this as well. So, yes, your hands are very, very good because they give you a physical display of what you're saying, and it makes a lot of things make more sense to you. What's another one? It's like, yeah, when you have this and this idea and you put those things together, you get this. It just makes more sense. So with that, I yield and conclude. I truly do hope that this helps a lot of people. Words are so beautiful, and language is so important to develop competency in. And please, if you guys have any questions for me, leave them in the comment section. Please do leave video recommendations and requests. And like, subscribe, share, all that jazz. And I'll see you next week. Everybody stay safe, stay dangerous, and always be wise. Shalom.